Welcome to the ATA Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Baird, and you're listening to Inside Specialization, our series on the what, why, and how of specializing in a specific field of translation or interpreting. In each episode, members of ATA's Professional Development Committee will interview translation and interpreting specialists. They'll ask about what the work entails, what skills are needed, the pros and cons, and so much more. The goal is to showcase the variety of career paths in translation and interpreting and help working professionals and students understand what's out there, how they can get started, and what they need to succeed. Specialization is arguably the best way to strengthen your translation and interpreting business and stand out from the crowd. We're hoping to bring you one episode a month, and we hope you'll join us on this informative journey. This podcast is brought to you by the American Translators Association. If you'd like to know more about ATA, we'll have some information at the end of the show. All right, now over to the PD Committee and this edition of Inside Specialization.
Hello, and welcome to the latest edition of the ATA Podcast Specialization Series, a special collaboration between the ATA Podcast and ATA's Professional Development Program. My name is Ann Connor, and I am a member of ATA's Professional Development Committee. We are really excited to bring you this episode with a spotlight on food and beverage translation. Joining me today is our special guest, Adam Sachs, who will tell us about this area of expertise. By way of introduction, Adam is a Spanish to English translator specializing in the areas of food and beverage and academic translation. Prior to shifting his career back to his linguistic roots, Adam spent 20 years working in food and beverage, overseeing everything from tea quality for Starbucks to running a wine bar in Puerto Rico. He is a certified specialist of wine, holds the WSET Level 3 award in wine, a BA in Latin American Studies from Whitman College, and is nearly finished with his MA in translation from the University of Puerto Rico, UPR. He currently splits his time between building his freelance business and finishing his master's thesis, translation of a text that details an indigenous group's foodways in Mexico. When not working, Adam enjoys gardening, cooking, reading, traveling, and building Legos with his son. He lives in New Jersey with his wife, son, and 11-year-old Labrador, Nora. Welcome, Adam.
Thank you, Ann.
So tell me about your background and journey in food and wine.
So I began in the food and wine world really back throughout college. Basically, it was kind of a way for me to start finding work when like during off times in college when I was on vacation. Particularly there was one summer, like the summer before my senior year of college, where I went to school at Whitman College, which is in southeastern Washington, so it's Washington wine country. And the work that I was able to find, I stuck around it was in Walla Walla, Washington. I stuck around there that particular summer, and the work that I was able to find was working at a few wineries. I was a tasting room attendant at one winery. I did a little bit of production, bottling and racking at another winery. So that was kind of my entry into the wine world, where I started to learn about food and wine. And then kind of from there, I've gone from food service and retail and grocery and product quality and managing global supply chain, sales, sourcing, and I've moved around quite a bit. So I've worked in various markets, including Dallas, Texas, Seattle, Washington. You mentioned from my bio, San Juan, Puerto Rico. I'm now based in the tri-state area in Jersey City, New Jersey, which is a short commute to Manhattan. And I've done like within that framework. My most recent position was managing sales and sourcing for a German botanical company, and mentioned Starbucks in my bio. I was overseeing tea quality and formulation for them, and I was at Whole Foods in Dallas, managing wine buying for them, and most recently, I ran the wine program for an upscale wine bar in San Juan, Puerto Rico.
Wow, that's really impressive. So now what brought you to translation in this specialty?
I came into translation after moving to Puerto Rico. Ended up in Puerto Rico after I left Starbucks, and my wife got a job opportunity in Puerto Rico, so we moved from Seattle to Puerto Rico. And as I was kind of looking for things to do for the next step in my career, I was looking down a number of different avenues, and one thing that I looked into was the prospect of a terminal degree, a graduate degree in something. And I found University of Puerto Rico has a few different locations around the island, one of which is within San Juan, is in the Rio Piedras neighborhood of San Juan. And I discovered that they had a graduate program in translation, and I thought it sounded very interesting. So I went ahead and applied, and I was able to get in, and I found that I absolutely loved it. And it felt like I was, I just mentioned that 20-year career of working in food and wine and food service and everything. But really, I realized this is bringing me back to my roots of working with language and playing with language. And I had learned to speak Spanish at a very young age initially. When I was about 2 years old, we had a nanny from Nicaragua, and Spanish was almost as much my first language as English was at that point. So between my love for language and my bilingualism, and having gotten an undergraduate degree in Latin American studies, and spending almost the entire time that I was in college working part-time as a writing tutor, and plus a love and passion for travel. And I had spent a semester abroad and done some nonprofit work abroad in South America. I mean, this really seemed like, this would be a really interesting thing for me to be doing. This would really be something that I could really enjoy. So I was trying to continue. I wanted to continue with this program, and I was trying to balance that out at first with, in the short term, the work that I was able to find in San Juan was running the wine program at that wine bar. So that was that was how I started to kind of re-enter this path into translation, was while I was in San Juan, pursuing this graduate degree on the side.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Okay, so it was gradual as far as focusing on food and wine. You say also in your bio that you do academic, but because of your background, that's why you focused on the food and beverage part of it.
I mean, my background is very academic. I'm pursuing this field through my learning style is very much geared. I benefit from getting this master's degree in translation. I've talked to so many people in the freelance translation world who don't really think that that's necessary. And it's not that I disagree. It's just that everyone has a different learning style. And I know that had I not done this master's program, I don't think I would really be seriously pursuing a career in translation or as a language professional. So it was gradual in that sense of like coming around to this. But while I was in Puerto Rico, as I said, I was balancing these two fields. One was kind of ostensibly short-term in terms of income, and the other one was long-term. But I was also trying to build something long-term, because just trying to keep my options open in terms of, if I, knowing that so much of my background was in food and wine, I was trying to rebuild my credentials as a wine professional. So I was looking into different certifications that I could get while I was there, study groups that I could join. So that was kind of something I was doing in tandem with the position I had as a wine director. And then as I'm going through this MA program, it was crystallizing over the years of like, well, you always hear about how if you're going to succeed as a translator, as a language professional, it's important to have some area of specialization. And so it reaches the point where, now I have been in the food and wine world for 20 years, that's my specialization. I know that is an area where I'm very suited to do translation, and that's ultimately that's what my capstone project in this MA program is. My thesis is a combination of academic and food and culinary translation, if you will.
Yeah, can you elaborate on that? Your thesis and you said with your credentials, both of those things, like what kind of credentials would you think are useful? I mean, I think yours are definitely someone specializing in this area. And if you can elaborate on your thesis, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. As far as I'll start with the credentials aspect in the food and wine world and food service. For me, I think these were listed in my bio, but and we can probably provide information of these on the podcast summary, but as well. But as you mentioned, I'm certified through the Society of Wine Educators. That's an organization that's geared toward people who are within the wine trade, and they're interested in kind of the educational or the work on the wholesale side, or or in wine journalism, that type of work. So that there's everything from I think if I remember correctly, there are 4 levels on the wine side. There's and I'm a certified specialist of wine, and then the highest level that you can obtain there is to be a master of wine. Then there's the Wine and Spirits Educational Trust, which, as its name suggests, encompasses spirits and sake as well. I've only been doing the wine track. That has 4 different levels on it. And you don't need to, like, each level isn't a prerequisite for the other one. It's just kind of where you would be most ready to pass their exam. So I've got the level 3 award there. And then if you go through level 4, they have a different unit for each one, a different test that you take for like each topic. So you have to take a test entirely devoted to white wine, one entirely devoted to red wine, one devoted to fortified wine, and on until you finally get a diploma. And then you've completed level 4. Years and years ago, I became a certified sommelier with the Court of Master Sommeliers. That's probably the oldest organization around related to formal credentials in wine. I also did become a certified not a certified cicerone, a certified beer server. Certified cicerone is the highest level you can obtain with the Cicerone organization that oversees beer. And then, I mean, there are other ones. There are ones that are specifically associated with translation that I've been exploring a little bit. Like there are schools of wine in different countries. There's AULA, AULA, SIC. They have various courses and sort of mini master's programs related to food and wine translation. But in terms of, like, if you're pursuing formal credentials in wine or beer, those are a few. I've got a friend who's also got some certification in cider and cheese. So there are a number of options out there for those. And then as far as my thesis, it is a translation of a text called the Spanish name of the text is Comida de los Tarahumara. The Tarahumara are it's the colonial Spanish name given to this indigenous group in the Chihuahua region of Mexico, and it's all about the food that they consume in this this portion of Chihuahua that called the Sierra Madre Occidental. So that's the Western Sierra Madre, makes up about a third of the landmass of Chihuahua, which is Mexico's largest state. The rest of that state is primarily desert, and they call themselves the Raramuri. As I mentioned, the Tarahumara is the name that Spanish colonizers gave them. So I'm using that name, Raramuri, and it's my title is the foodways of the Raramuri, and it's a 10 to 12,000 word translation from this ethnography, which is in the words of a member of the Raramuri. So it's interestingly, it's a translation of a translation, because it's the original source text is in the Raramuri language, and then the translation into Spanish was published in 1982, and I do not speak pretty much a word of Raramuri, so I'm translating from the Spanish, which poses a lot of interesting topics as I write the translator's preface about talking about what it means to be translating a translation, if you will. But basically, this combines my interest in academia and food and beverage, because this is an academic text that I'm doing, but it deals with culinary, all of the core principles of culinary translation. And what I had to do was translate that text, which I've completed that portion, and then right now I'm working on the translator's preface, which is, it's up to me how long that's going to be, which is dangerous, because I can go down quite a rabbit hole on research of this, which is what's happening now. Most of my time leading up to the past few weeks was spent putting together a glossary, which is one major topic of culinary translation is term management. There are endless terms in the world of culinary translation that are often untranslated and can mean one thing in one part of the world and another thing somewhere else in the world. And sometimes they can be different in just within different regions of the same country, especially a country as large as Mexico. So that's kind of, there's a whole lot of cross-referencing and verifying and checking on the attributions and trying to determine, like, what does this word mean in this specific area of Mexico? What are they trying to say? I mean, you would be amazed at how much of a headache it was trying to narrow down how I'm translating lemons and limes, literally lemons and limes in my glossary, because it's, in Spain and in one part of Spain versus like in one part of Mexico, they mean something different when they say limon or lima.
Or Lima. Wow.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. That's just amazing. And I can understand that, because I also work Spanish into English, and how many, different countries, regions, territories speak it, and different food terminology for like peanut butter or something.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, one area we did not cover that I know is big for you is tea. Can you tell us a little bit about your background in tea?
Yes, tea. So if you look at my career in food and beverage, you can kind of, I often describe it as I've spent about half my time focused on wine and half my time focused on tea. About 10 out of the 20 years that I've been in that world, we're working for a couple of major tea suppliers. One was Starbucks, and the other one was a company called Martin Bauer, which is based in Germany, and they have their U.S. outpost in Secaucus, New Jersey. And with Starbucks, I was overseeing tea quality. With Martin Bauer, I was overseeing sales and sourcing. The U.S. outpost is the only place where they do sales of tea. So I'm talking about leaf tea, the Camellia sinensis plant, as opposed to botanicals as a whole. At Starbucks, I was dealing with everything with Camellia sinensis and all of their botanicals. But anyway, I digress. As it pertains to translation, my experience working with tea and botanicals would pertain to like quality and technical documentation, ingredient specifications, dealing with global supply chain communications. It's, with English is kind of the lingua franca with all of that line of work, but it does help. I mean, interestingly, in my previous position, my Spanish fluency was extremely helpful because the U.S., believe it or not, buys more tea from Argentina than anywhere else in the world. So
Wow.
at Martin Bauer, where we were dealing with a lot of high volume clients, we were buying a lot of tea from Argentina. So many of, some of the communications would be in Spanish when I was dealing with any of our suppliers in Argentina. And then much of the documentation would be in Spanish. So that required me to kind of have an eagle eye on a lot of details that we were sometimes submitting or reviewing, or dealing with the various organizations that needed to see compliance documentation or what have you.
Wow, that's neat. Now, what kind of translation work do you think is out there for those specializing in food and wine or other beverages like such as tea?
Yeah, kind of. I was kind of starting to allude to some of it when we were talking about tea, but things like technical specifications on the wine side, like tasting notes, are always a very important thing, whether they're for marketing collateral or brochures, or just kind of sharing tasting notes between different entities, whether it's like the winery and their broker or distributor in the US. Corporate menus, like a lot of hotel chains, they really want a consistent menu, and they're going to want it to look professional and high end. Cookbooks, obviously, a lot of translators they have a need to be involved in recipe development, food journalism, memoirs by people who work in food and wine, or chefs, and then kind of like my thesis, for example, where professional and academic culinary texts, there can be a need for translation there. It's just a matter of finding those clients who would want to deal with those kind of texts, and who are willing to build the professional translating and editing into their budget.
Yeah, that sounds really like a pretty good list. And this is kind of a silly question, but I just think I have to ask it. How do you feel about those like inaccurate menu translations that we've all come across? I mean, I don't even work in this field, and it just annoys me every time I go to because I do Italian as well, Italian restaurant, or a Mexican restaurant, Dominican or something, and they just don't have the thing spelt right or whatever. What would you say about that?
It's not as silly a question as you think. I mean, not only because it's something that as you mentioned, it's very common to see, but there are definitely so many instances where I've shaken my head as well when traveling and reading English menu translations. Like, one that for whatever reason sticks out in my mind is when I was traveling with some colleagues in Peru for a documentary project. We were staying in Aguascalientes because that's where you stay when you're going to Machu Picchu. That's the only town, the closest town with any form of accommodation to Machu Picchu. So you stay there overnight, get up really early, go to Machu Picchu, because you need to do that in order for that, because they limit the number of people who can go in there. So you got to make sure that your space is reserved. The menus at every restaurant there they need to have translations because of how many tourists are there, but they're poorly translated across the board. One dish in particular that sticks out in my mind was called bistec a lo pobre, which was usually translated literally as steak to the poor. So we were my friends and I were always joking about that, among other things on the menu. That one, for, as I said, for whatever reason, sticks out in my mind. You know, if a more proper translation for that would just be poor man's steak. But what's going on here, interestingly, reason I say that your question isn't entirely silly is because it speaks to a number of issues in this field, is that restaurants, whether it's in a tourist hotspot like Aguascalientes or in, I mean, perhaps to a lesser degree, somewhere such as France, where they take the trade and the work that restaurants do, they treat it a little differently. The mindset's a little bit different, but in general, restaurants have pretty limited resources. So they're doing the best they can. And they have people who, you know, maybe there are people who are working there who speak the language. Maybe they don't. Maybe they speak a limited amount of English. And so they try to translate it to the best of their ability, but they're limited in that ability. The other thing, as I was kind of touching on in regards to my thesis, there's a lot of culinary translation that, you know, not only can the translation vary between different places, but sometimes things just don't have a translation that will effectively transfer the terminology and the meaning. You know, for whatever reason, my mind seems to think of steak dishes today. I don't eat a lot of steak. I don't know why that is, but take another steak dish, which is popular in Puerto Rico. It's called bistec encebollado, which would literally, the literal translation for that would be onioned steak. And cebolla means onion. So it would mean like, it kind of turns the word onion into a past tense, which makes absolutely no sense. It's this thin cut of steak that's cooked with tenderized onions. So I would translate that as Puerto Rican steak and onions. Doesn't have the same effect of turning the noun onion into a past participle as they do in Spanish. But that if you do that in English, it's so atypical in English and so specific to this one dish in Puerto Rico. Encebollado is not a term that I've encountered anywhere else in Spanish, only in reference to this dish. So it would look really strange if it were translated that way on a restaurant menu. So this is, you know, that's part of the process of translation, is finding that balance between meaning and terminology and doing the best you can. So it's kind of like, I think of the translation of Puerto Rican steak and onions, and it's almost like liver and onions. It's another common dish. So that's, you know, it's a similar idea of coming up with something that's almost colloquial, or almost has an equivalent in English figuratively. And then there's, you know, the most obvious issue that we face in this line of work is what distinguishes a professional translation of a client-facing document, such as a restaurant menu, to a translation done by someone who may simply be fluent in the target language, or who may be using machine translation. And it's trying to get these entities or organizations or businesses to recognize that difference and recognize the value of a professional translation for something like a menu. You know, especially with, as I mentioned, like the ones that can build that budget into the work that they do, whether it's like something like a hotel chain or a franchise. Like those are ones that you know, you want to be able to get them to recognize it. And then you know, and then the smaller ones, it's kind of something more systemic of, you know, how they can potentially seek out a a professional translation for their menu.
Or at least an editor, just to avoid the embarrassment, because I'm sure, maybe I'm not sure, but I'm thinking the people that do speak, native English speakers abroad or native Spanish speakers, Italian speakers in English speaking countries or other, languages are going to point it out to them like, hey, this isn't spelt right, or this isn't right. This isn't what it means at all. But anyway, well, this was really captivating discussion, I think. And like I said, it's not even my field. So I'm fascinated with this. And now I can agree with my son, who's an expert on a lot of these things, that what I drink is not real tea because it's herbal and it doesn't have the types of things that whatever that was you said, the name of it. So my herbal tea is not really real tea. But with that, I'd like to thank you. Go ahead.
I mean, I try not to get on that soapbox as much because it's just colloquially referred to as tea. But yeah, within the trade, if we refer to tea, we're talking about the Camellia sinensis plant, which is that's how they would if you're in China or Japan, they cha refers to that. It wouldn't refer to something else in general.
There we go. All right. Well, thank you very much, Adam, for taking the time for this interview. And thank you to all of our listeners as well.
My pleasure. Thank you, Ann.
You've been listening to Inside Specialization, our series on the what, why, and how of specializing in a specific field of translation or interpreting. Big thanks to everyone involved in the production of this episode. ATA's PD committee developed and coordinated the interview. Mixing and editing was done by Derek Platts. ATA headquarters provided editorial and technical support. Now, if you learned anything new in today's podcast, I bet there's somebody out there who would like to know it too. Don't be stingy. Tell them about us. I've gotten to know so many great podcasts that way. I promise they'll thank you for it. And if you're not an ATA member, listen up. I've been a member for over 20 years. I can honestly say that ATA launched my freelance career, and I've never looked back. Nowadays, the demand for translators and interpreters is at an all-time high, but finding quality work isn't easy. ATA membership can make a difference. And ATA isn't just for translators or interpreters. Individuals, companies, and organizations can become members. We have teachers, professors, hospital administrators, language company owners, technology developers, as well as language companies, universities, hospitals, and government agencies. Go to ATA's website, atanet.org, for details. Or check out past episodes of this podcast where we talk about the benefits of membership and what's currently happening in the association. Thanks again for listening, everyone. Talk to you again soon.